Welcome back. Now, members of Parliament will vote on the 21st of this month on the impeachment of disgraced senior judges John Hlophe and Nkola Motata. The voting will proceed immediately after the tabling of the budget speech at the Cape Town City Hall. The Portfolio Committee on Justice concluded its report late last year and found both Hlophe and Motata guilty of gross misconduct. The Constitution states that a two-thirds majority is required to remove a sitting judge from office. For more on this discussion, we're joined now by legal expert, Advocate Modidima Mannya. Advocate, thank you so much for your time. I can see you are on the road, yet you have still made time for us here on Newzroom Afrika, so I'd like to thank you for that. Let's get straight into it. Quite unusual for there to be a special sitting like this on the same day as the budget speech, right afterwards. I think it's scheduled for around 4 p.m. What do you make of this?
Good evening and good evening to your viewers. I don't necessarily think it's unusual. Parliament has got what they call a programming committee, which obviously juggles the business of Parliament and allocates spaces for the specific issues that must be dealt with by Parliament. So for me, there's nothing unusual. I think Parliament is just working around, time and efficiencies. So I don't think anything turns on the fact that this is going to happen after the tabling of the budget speech.
I guess usually after the budget speech, specifically when it comes to, the news cycle and stuff, the focus is on what the finance minister would have had to say, on the opposition's reaction, on the economy, and not necessarily looking at a case that has been going on for quite a long time. I guess that's what would be a little bit unusual about it for the extraness in the news cycle.
Well, I can tell you that this issue of these judges is a major constitutional issue. And I can tell you that there are many people, ordinary people, who are affected directly by whether these judges should stay in office or not. So it's an equally important constitutional issue as the budget. Of course, the history is that, there's this excitement about the dressing on such occasions in Parliament. But that's not what ordinary people are interested in. The judges play a significant role. They exercise very serious power in our lives. So ordinary people will be more interested to see what happens to these judges than on the budget.
Absolutely. Now, taking a look at this, what really is a long legal journey since 2008 to finally get to this point, riddled with detours, and would you say we're finally reaching finality in this matter? I mean, it was only in 2021 when the JSC found Hlophe guilty of gross misconduct.
Look, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that finally the first phase of the process, because this is a three-stage process. The first stage involves the Judicial Service Commission and its arm, the Judicial Conduct Tribunal, which then conducts an investigation and makes a recommendation to the JSC, which ultimately takes a decision whether the conduct of a judge warrants that it be referred to the National Assembly for the removal of a judge. So we are in the second phase, which is the decision of the National Assembly. Then if the two-thirds majority obtains for the removal of the two judges, it will go to the third phase, which is the implementation by the President. But as you know, these 16 years also account for intense litigation. If you recall, in the case of Judge Motata, freedom under law ultimately went to the Supreme Court of Appeal, which ruled against and criticized very severely the Judicial Service Commission for ignoring some of the recommendations made by the Judicial Conduct Tribunal. But you will also recall that Judge Hlophe has been in and out of court to exercise his procedural and substantive rights on this matter. So I am not sure whether it will be the end of it, but you must bear in mind that the Constitution requires a two-thirds majority. Now the question, and that is the real issue, is what happens if a two-thirds majority cannot be found amongst members of the National Assembly in the face of the adverse findings made by the Judicial Tribunal. There is a possibility of further litigation, either way that the matter goes. So I'm not sure whether we have reached the end of the road on this one. It's possible we have, it's possible we have not.
And I think that's also been the sentiment coming out of Parliament with this announcement that's been made as well, with the spokesperson saying, as it stands, it's all systems go for the 21st of February. But notwithstanding, if we look at history, there could be legal detours that are challenged and faced by MPs as well. So if you had to advocate, and I know it's difficult to say, look into your legal crystal ball, how do you foresee these matters going in both cases?
Well, look, I think either way, when these matters go to court, the finding of the Judicial Conduct Tribunal will stand. That one I have no doubt to pronounce on. If you recall, for instance, the Judge Hlophe one, he even got some senior counsel from abroad. So he has actually really exhaustively dealt with the issues. And I think that with the decision of the SCA on the Judge Motata matter, I don't think he stands a chance, even if he were to want to challenge the matter further. But you must bear in mind that the only challenge can only come after the National Assembly has passed a resolution for his removal, or after the President has taken a decision to remove him. But you must remember that the President is constrained, because if you know, in the case of a suspension, he depends on the recommendation of the Judicial Service Commission. In the case of a removal, he depends on the notification. So the National Assembly notifies him that we have passed a resolution to remove this judge, then he does his compliance checks and he must implement that decision. So I don't necessarily think that any further litigation is going to help them. I think to a very great extent is the end of the road, but they have a right to challenge and they may elect to exercise their rights, in which case it will just delay the inevitable.
You know, you mentioned, Advocate, that, you know, they don't really stand a chance, and also trying to garner that two-thirds majority. Now, would the role of MPs like the former Public Protector, Busisiwe Mkhwebane, representing the EFF, affect that two-thirds perhaps? Would it affect the numbers of the people who want to see these two judges actually being struck off completely?
You know, and I think this is something very interesting. You know, very recently, the National Assembly voted on the sanction recommended by the Privileges Committee on the fate of some of the leaders of the EFF. And in fact, there was an overwhelming majority in adopting that report. We will recall that with regard to the former Public Protector, there were parties which were very vehemently opposed to the process in the first place, and they had issues about the report, but the two-thirds majority was passed. So it's a game of numbers. 267 MPs will have to vote for that. I think the opposition, to a very great extent, misleads itself about whether it's united on these issues, because half of the time you don't find them acting in unison. We do hear them talk sometimes in unison, but they don't necessarily act in unison. I think a party like the Democratic Alliance is likely to support the motion. The parties which are generally opposed have got very few numbers to make an impact, including the EFF.
Well, we will be watching that attentively. Thank you so much for your time, and travel safely as we see you in your vehicle. That was legal expert Advocate Modidima Mannya.